Welcome to The Intentional Exit, a leadership legacy podcast for those who don't just want to retire, but want to do it well. I'm Rebecca Schriver, and this is where we help you protect what you've built, reduce unnecessary taxes, and create a plan that gives you clarity, confidence, and control. So together, we make sure your exit is not accidental, it's intentional. Before we begin, please note that the information shared in this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as tax, legal, or financial advice. For guidance specific to your situation, we recommend consulting with a qualified professional. Hello, I'm Rebecca Schriver, and I am your host of The Intentional Exit, put on by Leadership Legacy. And today we're going to start episode 2, and we're going to talk about income. So when we're talking about income, we're going to talk about it in 2 facets. First is the income that you currently have, and then second is the income that you're going to want whenever you decide to take that exit. And so no matter whether you are working a 9-to-5, if you own a business, or whatever that looks like, whenever we're talking about exiting that particular realm, we're going to want to talk about what does our income need to look like in retirement. And so it's vastly different from when you're working. So when you're working, you're also looking at saving, you're looking at how much money can you put back. But then as we move into retirement and we're looking at income in that capacity, expenses really drive the bus. So we've got to worry about what are our expenses, because instead of looking at how much can we save, we're looking at how much do we need. And so really quickly, before we kind of dive down into this, I want you to know that on my website, www.leadershiplegacypro.com, we actually have a fillable PDF that you have access to. If you want to go and download that to your computer, please download it to your computer first. And then you can plug in your monthly expenses. So you can plug in things like groceries and gas and electric and those types of things, and use this tool to calculate your overall monthly cost. And then of course that will help us to figure out the annual cost, which will help you to know, hey, what type of income am I going to need in retirement in order to be able to live the same lifestyle that I live now? There's also some additional boxes in there that talk about travel and gifts and things like that, so that if your intention is to actually enjoy what you have whenever you're in retirement, then there are some additional boxes in there that will help you to be able to kind of organize what is it that you have to spend. Now, what I will tell you is that it doesn't have everything, right? If you run to Hobby Lobby and all of a sudden you decide that you're going to redecorate the living room, or you go and do, anything like that, right? You're going to make a trip to the local amusement park or whatnot, unless you've put it into the calculator, it's not going to show those things, but it can give you a good baseline for what it is that you're actually going to need. Now, as we talk about that, the other things that I want to bring your attention to is that a lot of people get a little bit narrow with their thoughts whenever they start talking about expenses. I'm only going to need this amount in retirement. I'm only going to need this much per year. And while that's a great starting place, there are other things that come into play. We talked a little bit in the first episode about taxes and how if you have taxes on your retirement, you have to account for that. So if you need $100,000 to live off of, you may actually need $130,000 because you're going to have to pay those taxes. And so I just want to make sure that when we're working through this episode, we're mindful of the taxes, because that's always a big driver, but that we're also not so focused on that. Let's talk today a little bit about inflation. Let's talk about, what does it look like to maintain your lifestyle? So I did some quick research, and I'm sorry I have to peek off of my notes today, but in 1995, okay, For a family of four, it took roughly $45,000 to $55,000 to be able to have an average lifestyle. In 2005, it was somewhere between 65 and 80. By 2015, it was between 90 and 110. And then 10 years later in 2025, it's estimated that depending on where you live, it's between 190 and $275,000 to live an average lifestyle. That's just to have your needs met. And so this isn't talking about luxurious vacations. This isn't talking about, being able to eat a steak dinner every single night. We're just talking about average cost. And so whenever we're talking about your retirement, we have to make sure that that income that you're trying to get to, right, those expenses and what those are going to look like in the future, if you're planning on living more than 10 years, if you're planning on living maybe 20 or 30 or 40 years, we need to be looking at what is it going to cost for you to be able to live the same type of lifestyle 5 years in the future, 10 years in the future, 20 years in the future. We also have things like healthcare costs. So healthcare costs have gone up exorbitantly over the last 10, 15, 20 years. You probably noticed, I know our family has noticed watching that increase. Things like groceries, I was out at the grocery store this past weekend with my husband. We ran to the grocery store without the kids, and there were very, very few things in the cart. And all of a sudden it was $180. And I went, do you remember when we could go to the grocery store and get a full week of food? And we're in our 40s, right? And we could get a full week of food for our whole family for $95, right? I'd go to 3 stores, and between those 3 stores, I might spend $30 here or $40 there, a little more here, a little more there. But on average, it was about $90 to feed our family for an entire week. And now one trip to one grocery store, if we don't want to eat macaroni and cheese and beans and weenies all week, then we're looking at a couple $100, sometimes more like $300. Now, our family has gotten bigger. We have 4 kids. So, that was a choice that we made. But as you're moving into retirement, these are real concerns, right? So what a steak costs today may be the cost of a hot dog 10 years from now. And that's a little extreme, but you get the picture. And so we want to make sure that we're keeping up with the inflation on electricity, water costs, property taxes, right? That's a big one where I live. Property taxes have gone up extensively, right? They've really gone up. And then we also have, where you can lock them in. Are you aware of that? Did you take advantage of it? So, as we look at that income, let's make sure that we're looking at the inflation factor. The other thing is, a lot of times people will put down just, hey, this is what my electric bill is. This is what my gas bill is, my trash, my healthcare insurance. This is my home cost, whatever that looks like. But then they forget, hey, I'm going to need to eat, or, hey, I might need medicine, or, hey, I might want to be able to buy that Christmas gift when that comes around. So just as you're going through there, I guess this whole conversation is around just be honest, right? It doesn't do you any good to kind of pull that back and to squeeze it down, because if you start squeezing it down, what you're going to find is that maybe you're not planning properly for the future. And so then whenever we start talking about this, of course, everybody starts asking the question, how much do I need, right? How big do I have to grow my bucket? What does that look like? And so for everyone, that's a little bit different. And so just because you've got $1 million in the bank, that used to be the gold standard. I remember hearing that over and over and over. Do you have $1 million in the bank? If you don't have $1 million in the bank, you're not going to be able to survive. You got to have $1 million in the bank. Then it became 2 million, right? You're going to need $2 million to retire. You've got to have $2 million in the bank. Oh, you need $5 million. Well, While those are good benchmarks, and if you've amassed that amount of money, fantastic, like wonderful job, it doesn't guarantee success. So, guaranteeing success isn't necessarily the bucket that you've grown, but it's about the income that you will receive over your lifetime. So for some people, man, $50,000 on top of what they'll get in Social Security is enough. For other people, it looks more like $100,000. Well, those are two vastly different numbers. Also, are you trying to support two people or are you trying to support one? These are things that we have to take into consideration. And if you are supporting two people, right? So let's say we have a husband and a wife and we're supporting two people. What happens if one of them passes away? Okay, well, that wasn't so bad, but what if the other one passes away? Uh-oh, maybe we have a much bigger problem, right? And so we want to make sure that we're taking a look at that. Some of our most successful retirement people are those people who get a pension, right? So they worked for a company or they worked for the state or they were a teacher or something like that, and they are guaranteed a pension over their lifetime. Maybe they were military, maybe they were a federal employee. But as we've moved into these last 20 years, pensions have really gone by the wayside. We have seen more and more companies get rid of pensions and opt for 401ks. And so this is concerning from the standpoint of, if you have a 401k, you actually have something to leave behind. So oftentimes with a pension, it was based on the life of the employee or maybe the life of the employee and their spouse. And they would have that income that would show up and it would allow them to know, hey, I can retire fairly successfully at such and such an age. But then when we shifted out of the pension mode and more into the 401k mode, it transferred how we have to look at things, because you're no longer looking at, will my monthly budget be equal to my pension? And if there's inflation on it, if we get an increase each and every year, is that voted on? Is it standard? What happens if I pass away? Will my spouse get it? Now we're looking at that 401k or that 403b or TSP or that bucket, right, of money, and trying to make sure that it's going to last us, right? It's going to stand the test of time. And so really what we need to be doing is looking at, can we create an income stream from that bucket? And there's many, many ways to do this. So there's ways as far as some people really dig into real estate, right? They want to put their money into real estate and they're going to have rental income and all of these things. And that's great. And there are people who do it wildly successfully. However, when you're nearing retirement, maybe you don't want to be a landlord. Maybe you don't want to worry about whether or not someone's renting it. Maybe you don't want to have to fix the AC or fix the roof, because again, those things have to come into your budget. And so if that's your thing, right? If you really love real estate and that's what you want to do, that's great. But know that there are other things that can come along that can make that more difficult. And then of course, there's the people who say, well, you just have to get your bucket to a certain size. And then once you get it to a certain size, you don't want to take more than 3 or 4 or 5%, but make sure that money is working for you. And that might work as long as the market kind of continues to go up and do its thing. But if the market has a major correction, like if we see a time like we did between 2000 and 2003, or in 2008, then that may become more difficult. We know that people who invested in the stock market in the year 2000, if they were invested in the broad stock market, they had about the same amount of money in 2010, meaning that they didn't really see any growth. And if that same individual was trying to live off of that money during that time period, as those dollars came down that were invested, what you may have seen is that if they pulled out of those accounts during that time period when it was also coming down, they may never have recovered. They may not have been able to stay retired. You may have seen them go out and get a part-time job or do something differently, or maybe they had to sell the house and move in with a loved one. And I'm not saying that moving in with a loved one is the worst thing that could ever happen to you. For lots of people, that is how they want to spend their retirement, and families are very close and they create generational households. But for some people, if it's a forced situation, where someone is being forced to move into that type of living, it may not be as comfortable, right? It changes the family dynamic. And so if that's something that you want, fantastic, great. I'm so glad for you. I'm so happy that your family is that close. But if it's something where that may create strain, then let's make sure that we can keep up. And then that comes into the question, do I pay off my house, right? Should I pay off my house? Should I buy that one car with cash before I pass, or not, sorry, I apologize, not before I pass away. Should I buy that one car before I retire, right? And I'll have that car until I pass away. Sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit there. Well, that may or may not work. What if that car doesn't last? What if it has a bunch of problems? What if, you're only driving it so many miles every single year and you're restricting your lifestyle simply so that you don't have to buy another car? And if we're talking about inflation, look at the cost of cars. Oh my goodness. I mean, I went out and got a vehicle a couple years ago because, again, our family expanded and the vehicle that I had just really would not work. And it was ridiculous. I could not believe the amount of money that it cost to pick up a car. It literally was almost the same exact amount of our first house to buy a car. I mean, it's just absolutely insane. And so we want to make sure, like I said, if you have this bucket of money, that we're protecting it, right? That there are ways that you can protect against some downside risk. There are avenues in which you can invest those dollars where you get the upside of the market, but you have protection against that downside. And so what does that look like? And we call that the safety first strategy. So we talk to our clients about, if you woke up tomorrow and there was a certain amount of money that if your dollars, if you opened up your account, whatever account it was, and it had dropped below a certain threshold, what number would that be that all of a sudden you might, have a lump in your throat, or your stomach might not feel so great? So what would that look like? And then maybe those are the dollars that we need to put in a position of low risk, right? Maybe those are the dollars that we need to say, hey, we don't ever want to lose money on this amount of money. And there are vehicles out there that you can use that will give you a floor that you no longer have to worry about going below that number, unless you're spending the money. If you're spending the money, it's gone, right? Like, I can't do anything about that. Spending the money, if you're writing the checks or you're, swiping your card, if the money's gone, it's gone. But that means you got to use it and it didn't lose value simply because you had it in something that was more variable, right? And so if you have it in something that's more variable, then you have the risk, if you will, of it going down and you needing that money to live off of, because that's why you put it away at the same time. And again, if it happens in the wrong sequence, it can cripple your ability to have a successful exit, right? To have that successful retirement. And so the clients that I have that do the best, they really manage this by taking advantage of both sides. So there are about 2 to 3 sides of investing. So depending who you talk to, there is the real estate side, there is the insurance side, and then there's the one that everybody knows, which is the banking side or the securities side. And so my clients who are most successful take advantage of at least 2 different parts. And so instead of being all in one or all in other, they have their eggs in different baskets. And so by doing so, we can be a little bit more secure around this income that we want to show up each and every year, that we don't want to outlive. But we also need to be able to keep up with inflation. So by creating different buckets, we can create downside security without worrying about all of the inflation. And I say worry, right? I'm not saying that we don't have to keep our eye on it. I'm not saying that we don't have to look at what's going on. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do annual or semi-annual reviews. What I'm saying is when you balance both sides, if you wake up in the morning and all of a sudden, the country is in a hubbub because Wall Street has done something that has caused the stock market to drop significantly, you can sip your coffee and know, hey, I balanced it. I had a plan. So if something like this happened, I could pull from a bucket that didn't lose value and had a floor, right? On the flip side of that, if the market is raging up and we've got all the upside in the world, you know that you have dollars kind of put away into that, and you can take advantage of it and you can pull them out whenever that's high. And so by having both sides, by balancing both sides, we can make sure that you are in a position to take advantage of whatever is happening, right? So you can take advantage of what that looks like. And doesn't that feel better than being subject to whatever is going on in the world? It gives you back control. It allows you to hold on to your keys and say, no, I'm driving this, right? This is my retirement. I own it and I want to drive it. And so that's really what we're looking to do. We're looking to give you confidence around that money showing up every single year and knowing exactly how we're going to get it, where we're going to pull it from, and having the options of saying, no, you know what, I'm going to hold off this year on this, but I'm going to take it from here. Or, you know what, I'm going to hold off on this because things are looking a little crazy, but I know that I have this fund over here that's going to provide me that income without harming me moving forward. And so just so you know, this looks different for everyone, and we work with everyone differently, the same, but differently, because we want you to know that we're looking at your particular situation. There are variables that are going to affect everybody, right? Inflation is going to affect everybody. Taxes, well, depending, right? Taxes are going to affect everybody. We're going to have different things that come along, right? Maybe we have a health incident, or we have, a long-term care thing that comes along that says, hey, we're going to need additional dollars to be able to take care of this. But my clients who do really, really well, we've spent time looking at all of it. We've spent time taking all of those things into account and making sure to put them in the best position possible and insulating them, bubble wrapping them as much as possible against those things. And a lot of times, guys, it's not this massive change, right? It's not, oh my gosh, we've got to, change everything you're doing. A lot of times it's just taking a different path that separates you just a little bit. And that separation over time makes a significant difference in where you actually end up. Just by making a 2 or 3% change, right? Just a small change can make the difference over time. So step one, we have to know what your expenses look like. Like, that is step one for anybody to be able to figure out what is it that you need to be able to make that intentional exit. And so again, stop by the website, click on the link, drop in your expenses, know what it is that you are spending, know how that looks. And I've got 2 or 3 people, maybe even more than that right now, who are going, well, I already know that, right? My IT, my engineers, those people who are budgeters, oh my goodness, we could go back 10 years and they know exactly what they spent. But if you're somebody who maybe doesn't, make sure to go ahead, get on the website, download that PDF, fill it out, know what your expenses look like, and then give us a call and let us work through, hey, what does this look like? How can I set myself up for success? How can I make this intentional exit and know that year after year, I'm going to have the kind of income that's going to help me have the best potential for success? So if this podcast has made you think differently about, your retirement and your money, then it's done exactly what it was intended to do. So do not constrain this as tax, legal, or financial advice. You definitely want to talk to a qualified professional about your particular situation. We don't want your exit to be questioned, right? We don't want it to be questionable. We want it to be intentional. And so thank you so much for joining us for the intentional exit. If you found this valuable, please like and subscribe and share us with a friend who may also want to have an intentional exit. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week. If this episode made you think differently, then that's exactly what this podcast was designed to do. Just a quick reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and shouldn't be considered legal, tax, or financial advice. Always consult with a qualified professional about your particular situation, because your particular situation deserves more than guesswork. It deserves intention.